and we are back on the Zero Hour. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and joining us now is Zaid Jilani. Zaid is a contributing writer to Alternet, where my byline occasionally appears. Zaid, first of all, thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here.
Listen, man, you have been writing a lot of great stuff lately. You've been churning out really good stuff that makes really great points that I think are important, and I wanted to discuss several of those pieces with you, if you don't mind. And I wanted to start a little bit with Baltimore, because Baltimore is clearly, first of all, highlighting some fractures in our society, and secondly, of course, it's been the story this week. So you made a couple of great points about Baltimore. First of all, let's start with this, maybe Rand Paul. And Rand Paul had some comments on the unrest there. Tell us what your take on that was.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because Rand Paul, probably more than anyone in his political party, has sought to do outreach to the minority communities, also other communities impacted by mass incarceration, criminal justice overreach. And yet, you know, when he was asked about Baltimore, he really didn't bring any of that up. I mean, he started talking about how, you know, his train went through Baltimore and he's happy it didn't stop, how, you know, there's a real problem there of you know, lack of fathers, of, you know, role models, things like that. I mean, it was basically the sort of thing you would imagine hearing any Republican say, you know, since Ronald Reagan, you know, basically heaping blame on people but not really being constructive in any way. And, you know, the ironic thing about this is that Rand Paul actually has a son. You know, he has several children, but one of his sons is a 22-year-old. You know, he was arrested just, I think, a week before last, on a drunk driving charge. You know, he actually ran into a car, and that was the third arrest he's had related to alcohol. So he has a real problem. And you know, it may be very easy to say that we don't know the specific problems of all the people in Baltimore. I mean, it'd be very arrogant for us to say that, but in this case, it seems pretty obvious that maybe he could use some sort of closer parenting, right? You know, his father is away running for president. Maybe that's part of the explanation for why he can't control his own you know, his own home. So I think that you know, I think that Rand Paul really sort of made a big mistake politically, just going out here on a limb when the situation is like it is with his own children.
Yeah, and you know, I got to tell you, my first reaction is usually when children of candidates are brought up, well, hey, you know, don't go there because, you know, everybody has their issues and problems. We're all human and all that. But the fact that he did this so quickly after his son, who doesn't have the excuse of, you know, shootings and violence and poverty and all that and runaway police, just among other things, I would say, you know, one, that makes it okay to go there. And two, I guess what I was struck by is, as you say, I mean, the political ineptitude of it. I mean, here's a guy who's trying to portray himself as a different kind of Republican, one who can appeal to minority communities and younger people and the libertarian thing. And it seems like he's so eager to distance himself from any of that he's trying to out-Republican the other Republicans. I mean, that's the only thing I can think. But this joking, I'm glad the train didn't stop, this calling the behavior in Baltimore thuggery and thievery, which are code words, or, you know, certainly taken as code words by a lot of people. The police have to do what they have to do when there's documented evidence of excessive police violence in Baltimore. It seems to me, is this guy just not too bright?
Well, I think that, you know, he's sort of in an identity crisis right now, right? I mean, he's trying not to be his father. He sort of saw his father run two times, three times. His father sort of had a ceiling, and, you know, maybe he had hit a sweet spot a few years ago to where he was more popular than Ron, but he still kind of felt like he had to do more, particularly in this primary, which is, I think at this point, maybe the most extreme primary in modern history for the Republicans. I think the party is more sort of just reactionary and sort of against everything that's happened the past few years than it has ever been. So I think he's trying to sort of orient himself to that. But I think the flaw in doing that is that he's going to eliminate distinctions between himself and the other candidates. I mean, if he wants to, if he wants to be Marco Rubio, he can be Marco Rubio, but there already is a Marco Rubio in the race, right? So I think that he may actually see this strategy start to fall apart on him when he doesn't turn out the young people that he was counting on, when he doesn't bring more racial minorities into the party and things like that. So it could definitely come back and bite him.
Well, I feel he's blowing it so badly that we may not need to give him much attention after this. But and of course I could be wrong, but I feel that he's blowing this campaign. He doesn't know how to run, and I blame his own father's parenting skills for all of it. We're talking with, not really, we're talking with Zaid Jilani about his writing for Alternate. The other piece, the other aspect of the Baltimore story, the political dimension of it that you brought up, is that, of course, the presidential candidate, Martin O'Malley, is now running and became governor of Maryland and is now running for president on the Democratic side, but he was mayor of Baltimore, and a lot of this, some people would say, is on him. This is the product of his police strategy. So you have a piece, presidential hopeful was warned his police strategy would produce more Rodney Kings in Baltimore. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, so when he came in Martin O'Malley, I should step back. Martin O'Malley is considering running for a Democratic nomination, challenging Hillary and now Bernie Sanders. And many people know that he was governor of Maryland. Less people know that he was actually mayor of Baltimore around the turn of the century. And, one of his big initiatives was to lower crime. He really campaigned really heavily on, we're going to, bring the crime rate down. And Baltimore does, typically have significantly high crime rates. It has a national reputation for that. And during his mayoralty, I mean, that did happen. I mean, the crime did go down. Maybe it's not all attributed to what he did, but, it did go down. But he used extremely harsh sort of policing that sort of soured relations with a lot of people in the city. I mean, for example, in 2005, there were 100,000 arrests, and this is a city of 640,000 people. So you can imagine, if you live in Baltimore, either you've been arrested, someone that's been arrested, so on and so forth. So the issue here, and I think this is an issue that will come up for the Clintons too, and that both of them sort of champion really tough policing as well, is that what they did to some extent did work, or if it didn't work, it at least coincided with drops in crime. I mean, there's other things like the economy and things that impact crime, but the problem is that this isn't a sustainable solution. Well, I think what we're seeing in Baltimore is that the folks there feel so embittered and so alienated from the rest of the rest of the population there. They particularly feel alienated from the police and from politicians. And it's interesting, O'Malley actually went to Baltimore. He canceled some trips that he was doing to Europe to do some paid speeches. He came back to the United States. He went to Baltimore, and everywhere he goes, people are attacking him. They all recognize him from being mayor there, and they're all complaining to him that, look, our part of the city is just terrible. We don't have jobs. We feel like we're a disaster here. And he's just kind of throwing up his hands, saying he did his best, right? So I think this is we don't see this that often. All the time, this is sort of under the surface, right? It's right below where the media looks, where politicians talk about, but it has a real consequence, sort of not addressing the underlying problems of people, but just relying totally on the policing solutions.
Well, it's interesting because I remember at the time, and you mentioned it in your piece, that O'Malley relied heavily on the data-driven police model that they used in New York, CompStat, and all of that. And, I guess it makes sense to track the data of where crimes are occurring and what kind and get involved in that. But it wasn't just that either. It was, as you say, very aggressive policing models that can easily get out of hand. And if you tighten down the pressure from above using the police force, but as you say, don't create more economic opportunity, it can be a recipe for disaster. To me, I don't know if you've thought about this, Zaid Jilani, but I guess one of my questions about this is, what does this do? Look, let's face it, Hillary Clinton is the odds-on favorite. Nobody questions that. It's basically hers to lose. But so I guess Martin O'Malley maybe was hoping for a miracle or to wind up as vice president. But what does this do to his prospects, you think?
Well, I mean, I think he in some ways is like the John Edwards of this cycle, in that he's really trying to rally a liberal base, even though he does not have a liberal record. And I think that kind of catches up with him with Baltimore, right? I mean, people are going to be looking at him saying, you are not only the mayor of this city, but you are the governor of this state, and this is what, this is what's happening in your backyard. What is your record? And it's not often that, politicians see their record sort of catch up to them, right? At the moment they're trying to launch a new political campaign, but I think that's exactly what happened to O'Malley. So I guess the onus is on him to try to figure out a response to this, which I'm not really sure what he will do.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you remember it the way I remember it, which is when he first ran or began positioning himself. He hasn't declared at this point, but when he first started expressing interest in running and began making public statements, I mean, they were all, from a progressive point of view, great about Wall Street and about Social Security and even about triangulation and the way the Clintons did things in the 1990s and, trying to make the Democratic Party more, in my opinion, more appealing to corporate interests and so on. But it all sounded good, but this too reminded me a little bit of John Edwards, which is I recalled him as being a very classically centrist politician himself, very much in the Clinton mold, very much trying to appeal to some of the same interests, and kind of reinvented himself, as I recall it, as a progressive. And I haven't gone back and researched his record, but does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was, I'm trying to think if it was 2006 or 2007. I think it was 2007. He actually wrote an op-ed in Washington Post with Harold Ford, of all people, who's, obviously kind of a flag waver of the Democratic Leadership Council. And,
right.
He wrote an op-ed saying that Democrats have to seize the center and sort of warning against going to the left and things like that. So, I mean, maybe he felt that was the preferable political orientation for him at that point. He felt like, maybe that'll get him ahead, and now he feels like, okay, well, the only way he's going to make some traction in this race is by acting more to the left. So, I think it is kind of an open question, and I think people would be right to question sort of his motivations and his ideology, given all of these facts, because he himself has not been at all consistent on this.
Well, so it's interesting. I mean, it's interesting you have a contrast. You have Rand Paul in the Republican race kind of running away from his best ideas and moving towards his party's center. And I guess, in a way, Martin O'Malley is doing the same thing, because it seems to be that the Democratic political class is moving to the left, not necessarily as quickly as the base is, but it is moving to the left. So you have... I guess you have some, what would you call it, symmetry there. But two great pieces, and what I'd like to do is maybe take a quick break now, and when we come back, talk about a couple other things you've written, one on progressive strategy, and another that might force me to stop going to one of my favorite guilty pleasures for eating when I'm down south. So if we can take a break, we'll come back after this. We're talking with Zaid Jilani, a contributing writer at Alternet, and this is The Zero Hour. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and we will be right back.